I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to Scott Walker, that whole I won't back down thing, not so much. Scott Walker of Wisconsin, the anti-union crusader, the Harley-riding governor, is dropping out of the presidential race.
Today, I believe that I'm being called to lead by helping to clear the field in this race so that a positive, conservative message can rise to the top of the field.
Mark, Scott Walker, front runner in Iowa a few months ago, now out of the race. What happened to him?
The simplest way to think of it is what we call the virtuous cycle in politics. You rise in the polls, you get better press clips, you raise more money, you publicize how much money you raise, you're able to get better press clips, you rise in the polls, then you get to the debates, you do well, you rise in the polls. Walker did the opposite. He did the unvirtuous cycle. Worsening poll numbers, worsening fundraising, and horrible candidate performance, not just in the debates, but on the stump.
I believe a friend of ours, Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi, former governor, likes to say that good gets better and bad gets worse, which is the encapsulation of the thing you just said. And there's no doubt that it's been bad for Scott Walker for a while and getting worse. Once you're in that downward spiral, it's really hard to get out of it. But there is a thing that we think of in politics as kind of athleticism, political athleticism. Are you able to play in the major leagues? And you think back on 2008, when a lot of people thought Mitt Romney on paper looked like a potential Republican nominee, did not have the skills in 2008. Tim Pawlenty, on paper, looked like a potential nominee, did not have the skills in 2012. Scott Walker is very much in that same mold. In a small room, in a large room, just didn't have what it took to play at the big league level.
You know, the debate performances were both well below mediocre.
Yep.
His campaign acknowledged he did poorly in the first one, had to do better in the second, and he didn't. But again, I'll say, day to day, Scott Walker giving inconsistent answers, not showing growth as a candidate. He could have tried to power through here, but the reality is what really got him out, with the imperative now to get out and not try to hang around, is fundraising. His fundraisers were having trouble getting other people to donate to Walker, and he was having trouble convincing his current fundraisers that he didn't need to shake up his team. He couldn't shake up his team because the ship had sunk so much already.
Right.
It was difficult to recruit anybody to come in.
Right. Well, and the fundraisers, as you know, follow the polls, and they saw the polls going down and couldn't see a strategy for turning that around. I also think there's the move they decided to make when they decided he could have either played the establishment game or he could have played the anti-establishment game. Once they decided early on in this campaign that they were going to go for the anti-establishment route, that put him in Donald Trump's crosshairs. And no candidate has suffered more than Scott Walker at the hands of Donald Trump and the Trump effect in this race.
Yeah, the final thing I'll say before we move on is he'd not only fallen to 10th place in Iowa, but he had no traction in any of the other early states and no hope to gain there. All right, so Walker getting out of the race, in theory, should leave room for others. So, John, going forward, what is the impact on the other candidates and on the race now?
Well, look, I mean, Walker had obviously fallen a lot. There weren't that many people who were Walker supporters anymore for anybody to try to pick up. But the bottom line is that he still was, if he was plausible anywhere, it was in Iowa. So having a potential Iowa caucus winner out of the race is good for the other potential Iowa caucus winners. People like Ted Cruz, people like Mike Huckabee even, people like Ben Carson, and people like Donald Trump. Anybody who stood a chance of winning in Iowa now has one potential rival who's out of their way.
I have to say, a lot of Walker supporters bristled when I lumped him in with the establishment candidates. And even though he had been running further to the right than some people thought he would, I still believe in the end in Iowa, his path to success was with a lot of establishment votes. That vote now is totally up for grabs. If Marco Rubio doesn't improve there, if Chris Christie doesn't improve there, I think this helps Jeb Bush. I've always thought the establishment vote there would be anywhere from a quarter of the vote to 35% of the vote, maybe even a little higher. And this leaves that vote wide open for an establishment figure, an office holder, a former office holder. Bush is competing there. Let's see now if Rubio or anyone else can go in and get some of that vote. Because in a big field, most of the attention is not on the establishment side. It's on the evangelical side, and it's on the anti-establishment side.
Well, I mean, who knows what made up Walker's dwindling corpse of supporters out there in Iowa. Some of them clearly were attracted to him for some of his anti-establishment kind of tough on immigration stance, some of the things that he put forward. Some, obviously, in the northeast corner of the state near Wisconsin, might have been establishment voters of the kind you're talking about. But there's no doubt that if there's any electoral impact whatsoever of Walker getting out, it is in that one state and that one state only, because really you can count his supporters outside of Iowa on one set of hands. The
one impact are his bundlers. He does have some major league bundlers who've been supporting him. A member of the Ricketts family, a few others in New York, particularly in Wisconsin, a lot of wealthy people there. Those people are up for grabs, and you can bet that the other campaigns are already calling them, reaching out, trying to lock up their financial support, because there ain't nobody in this race, even Jeb Bush, who couldn't stand to gain a little bit more money off of Walker's carcass.
Right, and that is another way in which it's good for establishment candidates, because that's who those bundlers are, establishment bundlers that are left over. All right, coming up, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, on Walker dropping out, and much more. But first, all the other news, that Carson Muslim thing, definitely, after this word from our sponsors.
So while Scott Walker was dropping out, a bunch of other things were percolating on the campaign trail today. Lots going on. First, Ben Carson still not apologizing for saying this weekend that a Muslim should not be president. Here is the original soundbite from Carson on Sunday's Meet the Press.
I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not agree with that.
So Carson seems to be doubling down on his comment, although some of his supporters and staffers are fuzzing the issue up a little bit, but he's certainly not apologizing or backing down in any meaningful way. John, how big a problem is this now for Ben Carson, and how big a problem is it for the Republican Party?
A big problem and a big problem in both cases. Look, Ben Carson's, the biggest critique that anyone can launch against Ben Carson is that he is not qualified to be president because he just doesn't know enough about the office. He's never held office before. He doesn't have really sound policy and political views. This shows a stunning ignorance of the Constitution of the United States, which has, in Article 6, Paragraph 3, a famous clause that says there will be no religious test for the presidency. There will be no religious test for federal office. And what Ben Carson is saying here pretty explicitly is that Muslimism is inconsistent with holding the office of the presidency, which is in a direct contradiction to the Constitution. I think that it opens the door to the larger critique of him as not being someone who is up to the task of occupying the Oval Office.
Even in an anti-establishment year, I don't see anyone becoming the nominee without substantial establishment support, at least eventually. And the establishment's doubts about Carson go right to what this reveals, right what you said. I also think for the Republican Party, responding to this is a real problem. You've had some candidates not respond at all. Some have repudiated what Carson said, but this is not good for the brand of the Republican Party that wants to be seen as pluralistic and welcoming and tolerant.
Right. There is nothing good about the party having this discussion, and this and the related discussion, or that we'll get to shortly, the related discussion of whether Barack Obama is a Muslim or is not a Muslim. All of this is just bad for the Republican Party that has to grow, has to be bigger, has to be more inclusive if it's ever going to be a majority party. They don't want to have this conversation. It's no good for them, and yet they're having it right now.
This also turns the press against Carson, which I don't care what his supporters think. He needs some press support to do well, and this turns the press against him in a big way.
Agree. All right, Donald Trump is still in first place, but creeping up in the polls is Carly Fiorina, thanks to her performance in the debate last week. Earlier this month, she was at 3% in a national CNN ORC poll. Now, look at this change since the debate. In a new CNN ORC poll out this weekend, she's up to 15%, ahead of Carson now. Trump lost 8 percentage points between those two polls. Fiorina and Trump are both outsiders with business credentials. And on the Today Show this morning, Trump tried to dismiss the newest threat to his frontrunner status.
When people find out what a horrible job she did in business, running two companies into the ground, Lucent and HP, I think that, she lost to Barbara Boxer in a landslide. She was leading that race. It was a race that should have been won by the Republicans, and she got absolutely decimated in that race.
Why do you think she's surging now?
Because she's got a good line of pitter-patter, and it's if you listen to her speaking, it's the same line that I will speak to my friend Bibi Netanyahu, et cetera, et cetera. She says the same thing over and over and over, but a lot of the people didn't hear it in the debate, so they heard it for the first time. It's almost like robotic.
So, Mark, here's the question of the moment. how big a threat does Carly Fiorina pose to Donald Trump?
Well, let's see how she stands up to scrutiny, and let's see if she can keep rising in the polls. Let's see how much money she can raise. But right now, you'd have to say, looking at the field, not just her poll standing, but how she matches up with Donald Trump and how she appears to be unafraid of him. At this point, I think she poses almost as big a threat as anybody else, or as much as anybody else, to his standing.
Well, I think she is. He has a strong argument to make, and others who want to criticize her tenures at HP and at Lucent, they have strong cases to make. Barbara Boxer made that case when she ran against her in the Senate race a few years back. There's a soft underbelly there. At the same time, there's no doubt that that Carly Fiorina is the non-populist, non-nativist face of outsiderdom and of business experience. That gives her a kind of inroad with a certain kind of establishment voter that even Donald Trump does not have.
I got to say, the Boxer thing to me is not as relevant as some people seem to be making it now. That was in a general election in California. We're talking about a Republican nomination fight with a much different electorate. And there's certainly going to be a lot of press scrutiny, and there's certainly going to be a lot of oppo lofted over the transom matter. But let's see how she does, again, within the context of the Republican Party running on her record. All right, let's talk about the Democrats for a minute. Hillary Clinton is now basking in some good reviews from her performance at the New Hampshire State Party Convention over the weekend, on her first Sunday show appearance since 2001 on Face the Nation, where she did okay. And the headline helping her out today, she kicks off a health care plan rollout this week, is the new CNN poll on the Democratic side, where she has widened her lead a bit over Bernie Sanders nationally. Without Joe Biden in the race, the margin is even bigger. John, is Hillary Clinton now getting her mojo back?
Well, I'm not sure about mojo, and I don't know whether what we're seeing now could ever qualify for that term in the kind of classic Austin Powers sense. But there's no doubt that she's in a better place this week, as this week starts, than she was a couple weeks ago. And I think, the fact is the penny finally dropped at that campaign. They knew they had to get her out. They knew they had to get her to acknowledge the problems on the email side. They knew they had to get her into a different place. And she is in a different place now. I don't think her problems have gone away by any stretch of the imagination, but she's handling them a little bit better, measurably better, but only a little bit better now than she was at the worst of things 2 weeks ago.
I said their first Sunday show appearance. I think I got the date wrong. It's the first Sunday show appearance since 2011. Right. Look, there's no doubt she's had some decent news cycles and some good news cycles. That's a lot better than just talking about her emails over and over. And I think their strategy of having her answer the email questions over and over will work for a while, until the next batch of emails or until her congressional appearance on this stuff. But when she has good news cycles, it's easy to see how it is she's got such a big hold on the nomination. On the other hand, until Joe Biden makes his decision, I think the race is frozen just a bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to have to, yes, it's completely frozen, and I'm going to have to see her put together a string of good news cycles that last, let's say, more than 3 or 4 days. I'm going to need to see that go on for 3 or 4 weeks or even 3 or 4 months before I really feel as though she's on track. But again, you got to be happier with where she is today if you're with her, if you're in her campaign, than you were 2 weeks ago or a month ago. All right, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, is next after this. Our guest tonight is Donald Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. Corey, thanks for doing the show. We have breaking news with Scott Walker's decision to drop out of this race. What does that mean for your campaign from Mr. Donald Trump?
Well, I think what it means is clearly Mr. Trump's message continues to resonate, that people continue to listen to someone who is a non-career politician. I think most of the polls have indicated that people want an outsider, someone without a lot of elective experience, because, candidly, the government has been broken. And so this is another indication of that.
He has not yet called Scott Walker on the phone, although I gather he's told at least one other reporter, your boss, that is, has told one reporter that he's planning to give him a call. How much of a threat did he see Scott Walker as over the course of the campaign? How has that changed in your judgment?
Well, I think when Scott announced his campaign, many people thought he was going to be, and was at the time, the clear front runner in the state of Iowa. His campaign did not perform as well in Iowa as I'm sure he had hoped it would be, and we've seen Mr. Trump's numbers surge in the state of Iowa. So at the onset, he was a person who clearly, in the state of Iowa particularly, was someone who we really thought we'd need to watch, and then we saw that his message, Governor Walker's message, was not resonating, and his numbers declined accordingly.
Let's bring Mark in here. Mark, where are you?
Corey, do you think that Mr. Trump's statements about and towards Scott Walker played a role in Scott Walker having to drop out of the race?
Well, I think, as you know, Mr. Trump is someone who doesn't get attacked. When he is attacked, he counterpunches. And what happened was Mr. Trump was waiting for Mr. Walker to attack him, and a surrogate for Mr. Walker did that. And then Mr. Trump started to remind people of the bad fiscal climate that the state of Wisconsin is in. I think some of the people in Iowa weren't as familiar with that as they could have been prior to Mr. Trump mentioning it.
So how do you think Walker's departure affects the race?
Well, I think it's an indication that career politicians who have run on a record of trying to say that they have been successful in politics is not what the American people want right now. I think they want someone
Corey,
who has proven ability.
how does it affect the race, though?
Well, I think what it does is it helps to consolidate that support in Iowa. Clearly, you know, that was Mr. Walker's base. He didn't have much of a base in New Hampshire. And I think what you'll see is those individuals who were supporting Scott Walker come over to candidates like Donald Trump now.
Let's talk a little bit about Carly Fiorina, who's risen up in this most recent poll, in the CNN RSC poll. Your boss was on the Today Show this morning, and he said that Ms. Fiorina has, he said, quote, a good line of pitter-patter, and that, quote, you look at her and it's robotic. Can you flesh out those criticisms and explain what he means by those things?
Well, I think what he says is she gives the same stump speech everywhere she goes. So she says that her first phone call is going to be to Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's fine. That's fine. But I think what you really want to do is you want to take the opportunity to look at her record as a chief executive officer, both with Compaq and then ultimately with Hewlett-Packard. There have been a number of criticisms levied against her during that time. She's, fired 30,000 individuals. Just this week, last week, HP continued to lay off people. That's not a record of success.
Mr. Trump's gotten in some trouble with respect to Carly Fiorina by making one comment about her that was perceived by many people as being condescending and sexist in the pages of Rolling Stone. Does he not, and do you not worry that a, quote, a good line of pitter-patter seems a little bit like not obviously sexist, but at least condescending, and that might be opening him up to the same kind of criticism?
I don't think it is. I think what you look at is the political correctness that people are tired of. If you go back and look at what Carly Fiorina has said, she has publicly made fun of Mr. Trump's hair. No one's calling for her to apologize there. She's gone out and made disparaging statements about Barbara Boxer's hair when she ran against her. No one's making disparaging statements about that. So you can't have it both ways. And I think what you say is if you want to be in the arena, then everything is fair game. And that's what we saw on the debate stage, was that people treated her as the way she should be treated, as all the candidates should be treated, as an equal on that stage. And that's what I think you'll expect moving forward.
Corey, as Mr. Trump mentions quite often, he's first in the polls. He's been first in national polls in almost every state poll for weeks now. A lot of people in the establishment say the way he's going to come down is he's going to fall to second, and you all and Mr. Trump won't be able to handle that. Do you expect you'll fall to second, or do you expect to stay first the whole way?
Well, look, I think running wire to wire for 9 or 10 months is a very, very difficult project. Obviously, we're very pleased to be in first place. If you look at John Zogby's poll today, which was put out, he actually increased his lead 2 points from before the debate. He's now at 33%, which Ben Carson is at 13%, and Carly Fiorina is behind him on that. If you look at the NBC
do you expect to stay first or not? You said it'd be hard to stay first. Do you expect to stay in first the whole way or not?
Well, it's hard to say. Obviously, we'd love to have the opportunity to stay in first place, but the electorate is a finicky thing, making sure that we have the right ideas and the right messaging. And what you'll see in the next 10 days or so will be Mr. Trump's tax plan on how individuals will be paying less taxes in a Trump administration than they are paying right now. And I think those are the things that will help us to continue to stay in first place.
Will Mr. Trump, as some predict and hope, collapse if he falls out of first, or will you all fight your way back?
No, look, I think Mr. Trump has a proven record of being a success at everything he's tried, whether it's real estate or reality television or book author. We are in this for the long haul. I think you can expect us to be in Cleveland in July.
So let me ask you this question. You got these two guys now clear, or these two candidates can clear second and third place, depending on who you believe, Carson, Fiorina. Just which of those two is a greater threat to Mr. Trump?
Well, I don't think we look at it that way. I think what we look at...
You do look at it that way.
No, what we look at
You have to consider one of the two of them a stronger candidate.
I still think you have to look at the resources that Jeb Bush has amassed. He's got $125 million in a super PAC. He's going to be beholden to those donors. He's already spent committed $25 million in super PAC ads.
So you're saying at this moment that you consider Jeb Bush a bigger threat to Donald Trump, his candidacy, than either Carly Fiorina or Ben Carson. Is that right?
I think Jeb Bush is the person with the most resources in this race and has the ability to continue, and 100% name ID. Although he supports Common Core and is bad on immigration and is bad on amnesty, I think he's the person whose money will make up a big difference.
Okay. That's a
Corey,
very
you
straightforward
spend
answer.
a lot of time. You spend a lot of time with Mr. Trump. Tell us the single way he's most misunderstood by his detractors.
You know, I think what a lot of people say is he is not a detail-oriented person and doesn't have a firm grasp. It's unfortunate what people say. It's exactly the opposite of that. When you sit down with Mr. Trump and have the opportunity to talk to him one-on-one or in a small environment, he's very detail-oriented. He did a lengthy interview today with Hugh Hewitt on the radio where he discussed some significant foreign policy matters, and I think you'll see more and more of that moving forward as this race continues.
When Mr. Trump was talking yesterday with Chuck Todd, and this question about, we know there was this question, somebody asked him a question suggesting Barack Obama was a Muslim. Mr. Trump got some criticism for not rebutting that questioner. Yesterday, when Chuck Todd asked him about whether there could be a Muslim in the White House, Mr. Trump came back and said, well, some would say there's already been one there. That's already happened. That seems to me, Corey, to be flirting with some things that, again, have gotten Mr. Trump in trouble in the past. His stances on the birth certificate question, et cetera. Why does he persist in trying to raise these doubts about President Obama when he knows that they are just going to create a huge storm of controversy about what he does them?
Well, I think you got to remember how that question came to be in the state of New Hampshire. He's being criticized for not cutting someone off halfway through, taking their microphone away, as John McCain did, and then excoriating them in public and saying, we have to stop this right away. So it's the first time in Mr. Trump's career he's actually being criticized for not saying something.
I think if he had simply said, sir, you're wrong, he's not a Muslim, I think that would have sufficed.
What about the
excoriate anybody?
But what about the
All you had
opportunity
to do is state
let people make their own statement and then answer the question which he was asked, which was a question about training camps?
But yesterday on Meet the Press, he raised the suggestion very clearly that, in fact, we already have a Muslim in the White House.
Well, he didn't say we have a Muslim in the White House. He said some may say that.
Right.
Because there is that perception by some, not him, but others have said. He has not said that.
Right, but does he believe that?
No, I don't think he does believe that. But he has said that some people have alluded to that. I mean, that's been a point of discussion for many people over a significant period of time. Not his point, but he's saying some people have said that.
So your view is that he has a conviction that Barack Obama is a Christian?
Look, I think he has said that it is not his position to question Barack Obama's faith, to determine what his faith is. That's for Barack Obama to determine, as it would be for people not to question Mr. Trump's faith and let him decide what his faith is. No one came to his defense last night at the Emmy Awards when they called him a communist or a terrorist or a hypocrite, or the president didn't come out and say, whoa, let's stop this right now and let's support Donald Trump on this because it's not right. It's a double standard.
There's no doubt Donald Trump is capable of defending himself. He would be the first to say. Corey Lewandowski, thank you for doing this. We'll be right back. All right, sports fans, and this time I do mean sports fans. Make sure you tune in again tomorrow night, where tomorrow we'll be doing With All Due Respect from Fenway Park live.
Thanks for watching. Until tomorrow, we'll see you then. Sayonara.